AEW Dynamite hits a grand slam in New York City, and we talk about it next on the Squared Circle Psychobabble. My name is Michael Valenti. Joining me is Ralph Valenti. Ralph, AEW Dynamite Grand Slam happens this week, and the first show in New York City, very important show. A lot of buzz around it. They had to deliver, and I think the one match that needed to deliver more than any other match opened the show. Kenny Omega versus Bryan Danielson. It ends in a time limit draw, Ralph. I love this match. I got to be honest. This could be the best match ever on AEW Dynamite, and I think a lot of people agree with me. On our poll, our community poll, 85% of people said it was the best match ever on AEW Dynamite. Do you agree with that?
It's definitely up there as one of the best matches. I mean, there's only a handful of matches that come to mind. I always have a hard time saying something's the best because I think people tend to always go with whatever the most recent match is. So like, that's the thing that's going to stick out most in your mind. And right now, obviously a lot of people are talking about Bryan Danielson and Kenny Omega, and rightfully so, because this match was great. They did absolutely knock it out of the park. It's crazy to think that, you know, going back when AEW was really just even before its big fruition and before it even came to be what it is today, selling out, 20,000 seats. Who would have thought that we were going to see Bryan Danielson and Kenny Omega on free TV? And not only that, who would have thought they were to open the night?
I kind of had the inclination it was going to, because AEW Dynamite always has that first match with no commercial interruption. However, there was a picture-in-picture commercial break in this match, which I was not a fan of. But I understand they got to pay the bills, and, they got to, a lot of people on TNT to, pay, and a lot of people in AEW to pay. So it makes sense, especially when it goes 30 minutes in a time limit draw. But I think they should have just gone through commercial-free. Nonetheless, knowing that it was a time limit draw too, I am 100% behind this being the first match. I think get it out of I don't want to say get it out of the way, but people were anticipating it. They got it and they delivered. And I think because the card was already stacked with so many other good matches, I think people that wanted to watch for that match, I bet you stayed. And the ratings definitely showed that this week. Number one by a mile in the 18 to 49 demographic and cable, 1.2 million viewers. So that is a damn good number considering there was a lot of competition on TV last night.
No, absolutely. And I don't think we should sell short what AEW has been able to do in such a short amount of time. I go back to 20,000+ seats right in the middle of, New York City there.
Yeah.
And it's crazy to think that really AEW was almost kind of formed and came to be because of a tweet where it was like, what, can they sell out a 10,000 seat arena?
Right.
Now, granted, that wasn't necessarily AEW, but I think that was the foundation and the framework for what would eventually become AEW. And here we have two of the very best in Bryan Danielson and Kenny Omega going head to head in the opening bout of the night. And, this match was good for so many reasons because I think it put to bed a lot of the naysayers and a lot of the negative things that you'll hear about Kenny Omega. Last night, I think he proved that there's a couple of things I want to say about this. I think last night he proved he's definitely versatile. He can work a bunch of different styles, and this kind of showed it because this match was not your typical fast-paced high spot match. It had moments where, of course, there was high spots, but really it relied on transitions between submissions, chops, kicks, knees, suplexes. Like big moments were happening, but in between those big moments and setting up, big moment to big moment, there was a lot of downtime that built within that 30-minute match. And I think with Kenny Omega, a lot of people will say, oh, we can only work one specific style. And I think that we saw last night, he can definitely do a more, I don't know if you want to call it traditional style or not so, not necessarily like the newer style that we're accustomed to seeing with some of the matches on Dynamite. So I like the match for that.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it was a very good match. I wasn't sure if we were going to get a different Bryan Danielson considering that he's coming from WWE. And man, he was laying in some stiff kicks. I know he had some stiff kicks in WWE, but he took it to another level on Kenny Omega last night. The chops he was getting from Kenny Omega were really stiff. And some of the spots that you're talking about, like, they weren't just high spots. There was psychology behind them. And that's what made it even more. And it's ironic that this match happens the same day Becky Lynch, there's this comment that she makes that, fans are focused on the story, not dives and Canadian destroyers, right? This is a prime example of that. This is a prime example of that because they built the story and the spots dictated the story. And it wasn't about the flips. It wasn't about the Canadian destroyer. It was about the story that dictated the spots. And that's what made it so great.
Yeah. And, I think a lot of people too are, certainly critical of the style that the WWE guys work. A lot of people will say, oh, that's a boring style. That's a WWE type match. And when I look to the match that we saw last night, I by no means am I saying it was a WWE style match. But if you took away the AEW logo and you put them in a WWE ring, I really don't think you're going to tell the difference between the match that you saw last night between those two guys, or even the match that we saw between Seth Rollins and Edge. They're both very good professional wrestling matches. I'm not saying one's better than the other. But it just goes to show you, like, if you're good enough, you can go in the ring no matter what the banner is. And if they give you enough time and they give you the opportunity to go out there and work, the best guys are going to go out there and work. And last night, that's what we saw. We saw two guys go out there and deliver the same way Seth Rollins and Edge delivered last week.
Right. No, I totally agree. It was a great match. Now the question is, it goes to a time limit draw. What's next?
Yeah. And that's the question that I've been kind of pondering, going back and forth. I leave these two apart for a while. Like, I'm talking like a solid year. Transition Bryan Danielson. I almost said Daniel Bryan. Transition Bryan Danielson.
I don't know. I think a year is way too long. I'm thinking they have to make this the match at Full Gear. Like, they have to make this an Iron Man match or a 2 out of 3 falls at Full Gear.
But here's why I'm saying keep them apart, because I agree. I think that this going to a time limit draw, they can always revisit this and say, nobody won. We don't have closure. We don't have a conclusion to this match. We need to have it. But I feel like keeping them apart and building to that moment where eventually, if it is Bryan Danielson who goes over, that is going to be more impactful if they choose to leave them apart, because it will continue to build.
Right.
Kenny can continue to win. Bryan Danielson can start to get wins. I mean, when we think about this was his first AEW match, and that's fine. And he went toe to toe with the very best. But, I think that we need to see, Bryan Danielson get some wins. And I think that we need to see him lose. And I think we need to see him be rebuilt back up to this level where he is going to be the number one contender for maybe the championship or some other big match against Kenny with something on the line. And the other thing we have to talk about too is what's going to happen with Hangman Page.
I'm glad you brought that up. I'm glad you brought that up, because now that Full Gear was moved up 2 weeks, the show that Hangman Page is being advertised for as like the poster guy for his hometown show is going to be the show after Full Gear. So the way I would do this is have the match at Full Gear, Bryan Danielson versus Kenny Omega. Whatever match you want to do. Maybe it's just a singles one-on-one, no steps. Maybe it's an Iron Man. Maybe it's a 2 out of 3. But Kenny wins. But the close of the night is Hangman Page makes his return. And that's what goes to black. That, I think, would be a great cliffhanger to end Full Gear. And then it opens up with Hangman Page in front of his hometown crowd just to get that momentum back for him. Because Bryan Danielson, although he is new, and obviously he has the credibility behind him from what happened in WWE and his, long career before even WWE, he doesn't necessarily have to be the AEW champion. He doesn't even have to beat Kenny Omega. Yeah. That time could come down the line. But if Kenny Omega beats Danielson, that's huge for him, knowing that Bryan Danielson just brought a lot of eyeballs. And we already know this time limit draw has that Rocky feel to it. Because Kenny Omega already said on Twitter, there's no rematch. So he's playing Apollo Creed right now.
Yeah, and think about what made that movie Rocky 2 so special. It built to that moment where there was the rematch, and that's why I think they should let Bryan Danielson go his separate way, at least for now. Continue to get some wins, continue to feud with people. The fortunate thing for AEW is they only have a handful of pay-per-views per year. It's not like WWE where you're forced to like put somebody in a main event picture like every month, and then there's a rematch and another rematch, and now we're 3 pay-per-views in and it's the same rematch time and time again, which sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not so much. And sometimes you get a guy like Cesaro who's put in a position where you really want to see him win, but realistically it's just not going to happen. And rather than having them put somebody in that position, they're fortunate enough to only have, however many what is it, 4, 5, 6
4
at the most? 4?
They only have 4, yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think that they can build Bryan Danielson up with that time, keep them apart. And I wouldn't have him lose to Kenny just yet. If he is going to lose to Kenny, let that happen further down the line.
So Full Gear is less than 2 months away. If you're not going to go with Bryan Danielson and you hold off Hangman to close out Full Gear, who challenges Omega then? Like right now, the number 1 ranked wrestler is Orange Cassidy. Do you revisit that?
How's that possible? How's that? Come on. When's the last time? And I'm not going to get into a rant on this guy, but I was literally thinking about this as I'm watching this Dynamite. When's the last time that guy did anything meaningful on Dynamite?
It's been a while. I'll admit that. It has been a while.
How the hell is he ranked number 1? If you ask me, the guy that's been booked the best because of the way that he's positioned, and I've made this argument time and time again, is Aleister Black, Malakai Black. There's been nobody else who's been booked and positioned in a position where he's been made to feel more important, I don't think.
Yeah,
I think that this is where the ranking system does a disservice, because Orange Cassidy may have like 6 straight wins on like Dark or some obscure show. Did that hold more weight than what 1.2 million people saw last night on Dynamite? I certainly don't think so.
Right. No, I agree to that extent. And excuse me, I think eventually those rankings are going to get shooken up, because right now it's Orange Cassidy's number 1. Excuse me. Powerhouse Hobbs is number 2. And unless he's beating CM Punk, he's going to get knocked down. Moxley's number 3, and he hasn't even been involved in singles competition for how long? I think Christian Cage is number 4, and he already lost to Omega, and I think Jungle Boy is 5, if I remember the rankings correctly. Is another guy Omega beat. So the rankings aren't really telling you anything that says this is the next number 1 contender, unless they revisit Orange Cassidy because he got screwed out of that triple threat match.
You're saying Full Gear, you're suspecting that that's going to be the main event, Kenny Omega and Orange Cassidy?
No. If they don't go with Bryan Danielson versus Omega, right now, from what I'm seeing at face value, that looks like that's the route they can go. I don't think that's the route they're going to go, because it seems like Orange Cassidy's storyline with Matt Hardy will lead to a hair versus hair match at Full Gear. So they got to find somebody. And unless Powerhouse Hobbs pulls an upset and beats CM Punk, and now please don't put spoilers in the comments. If you went to a show and saw the tapings or read the spoilers, don't put them in the comment section, please. So we don't know if CM Punk actually won or Powerhouse Hobbs. I know it was taped, but don't do it. Hypothetically speaking, we don't know the outcome, but if Powerhouse Hobbs does, in fact, beat CM Punk, that's your number 1 contender right there.
It would seem so. But again, it goes back to the perception. With wrestling, the perception is one of the most important things, like, because you're portraying reality. It's essentially staged. You control the outcome. And if you want guys to feel important, if you're going to have guys that are going to be ranked your top 5 contenders, it should perceive what's happening on your main shows, which would be Dynamite and Rampage. And I'm sorry, but Orange Cassidy, ever since they've got some major players there, has been largely an oversight.
Right.
And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. It just is the truth.
Right. It's just the nature of the beast. They got a lot of star power now, and there's a lot to go around, and it's just going to help those young up-and-comers. And we had 2 young up-and-comers in the next match here, MJF and Brian Pillman Jr. We already talked about this. They had a feud in MLW, the Dynasty versus the New Heart Foundation. We finally get to see it on national television here on AEW Dynamite. MJF does win the match with the Salt of the Earth submission. I thought this was a good competitive match. However, I wish they could have kicked it into that next gear. I felt like it didn't happen.
Yeah.
MJF did get some good heat using Julia Hart to prevent Brian Pillman to go with the, I guess, a tope suicida or whatever attack to the outside. I thought that was good. Not a lot of involvement from Wardlow, though, which was kind of interesting.
Definitely interesting because they were kind of teasing that they were going to start building this feud between Wardlow and MJF where they were going to go their separate ways. And we didn't really get any seeds planted towards that. A little while ago, I talked about how it's crazy to think that, AEW has gotten to this point where they're selling out 20,000 seats. It's crazy to think that not too long ago, Brian Pillman Jr. was on this very show, the only interview we've ever done, likely the only interview we ever will do.
We'll see. We'll see.
But
if we do more than one episode a week and actually could get some people to interview, but as of right now, yeah.
And I'm literally watching the show thinking to myself, I'm like, not too long ago, you and I were just starting doing the show, and not too long ago, he was on the indie scene up and coming and just hoping to make an impact. Here he is wrestling in front of 20,000 people.
Mm-hmm.
Same could be said for Darby Allin, who we saw later in the night, who we saw wrestle in Waterbury in front of like 500 people. If that.
Yeah.
And here they are, just putting on a great show. And this too was very good. I think, Brian Pillman Jr. is still very young, still has a long way to go. But it was cool to see him get his moment here in front of all those people.
Right. And the fact that like both these wrestlers are under the age of 25 and they look good. And despite their young age, like there is definitely going to be a huge movement from between what we're seeing in NXT 2.0 and what we're seeing with these young guys in AEW. There's going to be a boom with some of these big names. You're gonna hear MJF for a long time. You're gonna hear Brian Pillman Jr., Braun Breaker, Rex Steiner, whatever you want to call him, Sammy Guevara. Like there's a lot. Darby Allin, Jungle Boy. Like there's a lot. Like wrestling is not going anywhere, and the fact that we have two big promotions doing very similar ratings and similar attendances and similar markets just goes to show you the industry's not dying, and like. Very bright future for these guys, and these two are going to have a long feud for years to come in AEW. But let's move on. You brought up Malakai Black, possibly the best booked wrestler in AEW since he started, going up against Cody Rhodes. And Ralph, the only thing missing from this against Cody Rhodes was someone putting up a sign saying, "If Cody wins, we riot." The crowd did not want Cody to win this match. Anytime he got any offense in, even if it was just a punch, they were booing him out of the building.
Is this not the same city that really was rooting for Goldberg and Lesnar to just both leave at WrestleMania? So
that is true.
I can't say I'm surprised. I think we've been to quite a few shows in New York, either at Barclays or a couple other places, and it's always makes for an interesting crowd. But I can't say I'm surprised by this. Cody Rhodes tends to be the guy that, for whatever reason, gets that Triple H effect. Like he could put as many guys over as he wants. People are just going to hate him.
Well, that's just because they're the EVPs and they have those couple of matches where they should have put the guy over and they don't. Obviously, the whole sledgehammer thing at Double or Nothing already started the parallels between those two. They both have wives that are the head of branding for their said promotions. Like there's too many parallels there that you can't ignore it.
I think with Cody, the thing that people dislike the most is the overproduction. He's got a long entrance.
But so does Triple H, another parallel.
Oh yeah, and I'm not saying I agree with any of this. Maybe I agree with parts of it. I think that Triple H, while maybe he should have put certain guys over, mainly Booker T in their match. I know for a fact he's putting over quite a few guys as well, and we've talked about it on the show. Cody has putting over quite a few guys as well, but I think with him, some people get sick of the overproduction. Like with him, the storylines tend to be super involved, super emotional. The entrances seem to be overproduced and overly long and things like that. And sometimes people look at that and they're just like, ugh, like, enough.
Right.
Like, just come out,
Right.
get to the ring and wrestle.
Right. No, I totally agree with that. And I think that definitely does not help him. And the fact that he's EVP and the fact that, he's doing the Go Big show and now Road to the Top is going to be premiering next Wednesday after Dynamite. Like, he's definitely the focal point of AEW. But as we've seen, and even in WWE, when there's a guy that is the main focal point and it's not exactly the guy that you want, the fans are just going to turn on you because it's like, you're not the guy we want. And it seems like Malakai Black is one of those guys that we want. And he was getting a lot of cheers last night for everything he did. And obviously the right guy won. The finish was, I got to admit it, I'm sorry, but the finish was freaking comical. You have Arn Anderson distracting the ref. Then the ref tells him to get down. Then he tries to go around the post. He loses his footing. He falls. And I'm pretty sure that was a botch. That was not intentional. Yep. And I'm only saying it's funny because he was okay. He's selling it, whatever. Then he gets back up. Then Cody bumps him off the apron. Cody gets outside and Arn's like, what are you doing? Get Malakai. He's outside. Yeah. So then he goes get Malakai, throws him back into the ring. He gets blackmisted and then rolled over for the win. Not the best finish, but Malakai Black gets the win, and I think people are okay with the finish because of the right guy won.
The right guy won. He won in a shitty way. I think that having him go over with the black mass would have, help him maintain that aura of invincibility that I think he certainly has, and he continues to carry that over in all of his matches.
I agree.
And I get it. He's playing this dark figure, and The Undertaker has done this in the past too. And sometimes people get overly critical when you start going to the goofy, gimmicky stuff like spraying mist and things like that. I mean, I'm fine with it if it's a one-off. I just hope this doesn't become like a weekly thing where he's going to continue to go to it every match.
Right. It was just.
I'm just glad he won.
Yes, and now maybe this is the start of him getting a push towards the AEW Championship or even the TNT Championship, knowing that next week it's Miro versus Sammy Guevara. Maybe Sammy Guevara dethrones Miro, and then Malakai Black beats Sammy Guevara. Who knows where it goes from there? But let's head on to the next match, Ralph. Sting and Darby Allin against FTR. Sting submits Dax Harwood with the Scorpion Deathlock for the win. This one, I mean, I like Darby. I like the dynamic with Sting. I think it makes sense for them to win, but FTR, ever since they lost those AEW Tag Team Championships, are just back where they were in WWE. They are an afterthought, putting over guys, and not exactly the best tag team in the world, in my opinion.
Correct me if I'm wrong. FTR and Proud and Powerful are 1-1.
Yes, I believe so.
I think that's right.
Yes, because FTR won when Cash Wheeler got cut, but then Proud and Powerful got the win back.
And I just can't believe we haven't seen more from them or got closure to that, especially if they're splitting 1-1. Look, I mean, the match last night, I'm going to be honest. Growing up, I was never a big WCW fan. I watched from time to time. I never really was into Sting. When he came to WWE, I knew the significance of that was pretty impactful. Because when you look at the backstory of him supposedly wanting to go to WWE and saying no and all that type of stuff.
Right.
I thought last night, for whatever reason, that match was, aside from the outcome, really good.
I agree. It was really good. And Sting was really good.
Yeah, surprisingly good. And I give credit to AEW because I think what they wanted to do was give Sting a big moment and a big spot when he was going to be in front of 20,000 people in New York, because who knows how many more times throughout his career he's actually going to have the opportunity to do that.
Right.
So credit to them. I don't think it should have came at the expense of FTR, especially because they are one of the best tag teams in the world, if not the best. I'm going to chalk this up to let's wait and see what happens. Let's not jump to conclusions. FTR is a tag team that can get their steam back next week. I was totally off on this. I said Sting was going to had to be the guy that takes the pin. And that didn't happen. So Sting was actually the guy that got the submission win.
Right. What did you think of, I think the spot from this match that everyone's going to talk about where Dax Harwood teased the tombstone.
Yeah.
Undertaker versus Sting, the match we never got. I thought that was great.
Genius.
And yes, it was really good. And of course, FTR, doing a little bit of trolling with their tights having the NWO-esque logo. That was a nice little touch considering, Sting and his whole feud with the NWO back in 1997. So nice little touch there. FTR definitely know how to throw back in their matches and always give those like little hints. If you've been a fan for a long time, they definitely give you those like, oh yeah, like those little nostalgia pops, and they do a very good job with that. Now that they were ranked third in the rankings and now they lose, so they're probably going to get bounced out. I know we talk about the rankings that they're irritating at best. I just hope now this leads to Darby and Sting getting ranked, and maybe they're getting a push for the AEW Tag Team Championship.
Yeah, I mean, again, it all depends. Like, how far are you going to try to go with this feel-good moment? Are you actually going to try to have Sting wrestle on a consistent basis? At most, I see them going and challenging for the titles, but I don't see them winning because, again, I don't know if Sting's going to be able to work consistently.
No, that's true. But let's head to the main event, Ralph, the only championship match of the night. And if you weren't going to have Bryan Danielson versus Kenny Omega main event, I think this was the right call to main event this match because it's the championship match. Dr. Britt Baker, DMD, retained the AEW Women's Championship against Ruby Soho thanks to the help of Jamie Hayter and Rebel. I thought this was a very good match. It definitely delivered as a main event. Mm-hmm. I think most of the matches last night were pretty methodical, slow paced. And then this one here just kind of instantly kicked into gear. And I thought they had great chemistry in the ring. I think they did a good job with Ruby Soho, getting her to believe like she might actually pull it off. But then Britt Baker eventually gets the win. I thought it was a very good main event.
Yeah. And Ruby Soho has been really impressive because of her, I don't know if you want to call it her in-ring ability. Like, and I'm not saying that as like a negative thing, but it's just in WWE, you didn't really see her get the opportunity to show that she was capable of being that good.
Mm-hmm.
When she was in there with Britt Baker, I mean, a lot of the transitions that they had going back and forth, she was great. She looked like she belonged in a main event, especially challenging for a title. So I thought that was really good. And, I expected Britt Baker to come out on top. It'll be interesting to see where Ruby Soho goes at this point, but she'll be fine.
Right. Now that they have Rampage, and it seems like there's going to be a new women's championship being added. It seems like, based on speculation, I don't think it's been confirmed yet, that they're going to have the TBS championship coming for the women's division, just like we have the TNT championship for the men's. Now that Rampage will stay on TNT, Dynamite's going to go to TBS starting in January. So maybe she's part of that mix as the first TBS champion. Who knows? But I think obviously she's got a bright future with AEW, and that women's division, which was easily the Achilles heel. And some people might argue it still is, but it's definitely gotten significantly better with the additions to Ruby Soho, the addition of Thunder Rosa. I mean, Serena Deeb isn't even involved, and Hikaru Shida isn't even involved, but they're part of this division. Jade Cargill, as green as she is, there's money to be made with her. And then you have everybody else from Riho to Nyla Rose to Jamie Hayter and Rebel. Like, they have gotten so much better in that women's division. It makes you very excited for anything involved with AEW right now.
And let me say this. You mentioned all those great, talented female wrestlers. And another thing I was thinking to myself, and that look at all the people that maybe even some of them had segments last night, but some of them didn't even wrestle. Like, I think we're all kind of saying, or we've all said in the past, like Raw is far too long. It shouldn't be 3 hours. I almost feel like Dynamite has enough talent to say if they wanted to do 3 hours and create compelling content, I almost feel like they can do it.
Right.
Because they have so many young up and comers that look at yesterday. I mean, Adam Cole wasn't even on the show last night. I mean, other than the run-in that he had. Guys like Ricky Starks. I don't remember him being on the show. Jungle Boy had a quick run-in.
Yep.
Jericho had a promo. Sammy Guevara had a promo. Like, and that's fine because they only have 2 hours.
Right.
I honestly think if they wanted to extend Dynamite to 3 hours, they could, and they can make it good.
Right. But I think their recipe right now, I think, is a good one where Rampage is the 3rd hour on a different night. I think if you start going to that 3rd hour weekly, you might get fatigue in that 3rd hour, which even on a good episode of Raw, people still get. And there's still that drop off in the 3rd hour. So I think they have the right recipe. Maybe eventually this 2-hour Rampage isn't just a specialty. Maybe it eventually becomes that.
I would make a suggestion that maybe quarterly, they should do quarterly Grand Slam shows that should be 3 hours. Have them be specials.
That might be, because I remember when they redid the TV deal and they're talking about these like quarterly special shows like Clash of the Champions used to be. Maybe that's what they're going to do. Or maybe the 2-hour Rampage is the special show. Either way, like both of them can work. And the 3-hour Dynamite, I think you got to be careful depending on when you do those, because, eventually you're going to have the NBA and NHL, which you're competing on your own networks with TBS and TNT eventually. That's going to play into effect. And the fall, it's going to be hard to really compete with those ratings. I know they did good this week, but eventually, those big shows are always in the fall. So do you do the big shows in the winter, the summer, where it might be a little easier to get more viewers? So I think it's doable. And right now with the momentum, it's easily doable. But what happens when the momentum dies out? What happens if a few guys get hurt? Or what happens when, you stack the 3 hours so much that you got nothing for Rampage?
I think if they are going to do it, I think a good pick, if they were to do a 3-hour show, should be the Dynamites following a pay-per-view, because then you can start to build new storylines and things of that nature. But speaking of last night, did you see what Eric Bischoff tweeted
about Vince McMahon?
I sent it to you.
Yes, I did see it, and I think that just is going to help the wrestling industry as a whole. We're already seeing it with NXT 2.0, the whole edgier content that we saw from this past episode. And, I know we don't really review NXT right now. And if you guys want us to start reviewing NXT 2.0, let us know in the comments. And if we get enough, interest in it, we'll start doing them. Because I know some people have already asked, why don't you guys review NXT anymore? Let us know why. Tell us you want to see it and we'll do them. But NXT 2.0, I love the flow of it. And that there is just showing you the future for WWE. AEW Dynamite has the future for them. And if Vince McMahon has his hand in NXT, where he's handpicking who these stars are, and Triple H just has to book it in a way to get these guys recognized, I think they're in a prime position. And AEW Dynamite, obviously, they have the momentum. And as wrestling fans, you just got to sit back and watch and just love it. Like, you don't have to love both promotions, but there doesn't need to be this civil war between fans of, I'm sticking my flag in for AEW. I'm sticking my flag in for WWE and bringing up ratings like, oh, well, Raw won the viewership and Dynamite won the demo and stupid shit like that. Just watch the damn shows and enjoy them, because even Raw this week was still pretty entertaining for 3 hours. Like, we're getting some good content for 3 of the 5 weeknights of the week. And if you want to throw in Impact, if you watch Impact, that's 4. And NXT, all 5 nights. What are you bitching about?
Yeah, and everybody can find stuff that they like or enjoy. I'm pretty sure from every show. I mean, Some people may be into Roman Reigns. Some people may be into Kenny Omega. But at the end of the day, I'm pretty sure right now what both of their title reigns are going to end up being is pretty significant for the history of pro wrestling, especially right now. So we better just sit back and enjoy it, because who knows when you're going to get something that's going to feel this special anytime after this.
Totally agree.
So, the one thing that I will say, the biggest travesty in all of pro wrestling will be, maybe of all time, is if we never get to see Bryan Danielson versus Walter, because I need to see what will happen to Bryan Danielson's chest if Walter ever chops him.
Oh my God.
Kenny Omega can do that type of damage, what would Walter do?
I agree. And because even when Walter was in the Survivor Series match, he wasn't even in long enough to even do anything. And Bryan Danielson wasn't even in the match, so it doesn't even matter. But still, that's a question right there. And unless Walter leaves and goes to AEW, or Bryan Danielson in 3 years comes back to WWE and becomes Daniel Bryan again, we may never get that answer, Ralph.
We may not.
No. What were your final thoughts? What did you think of Grand Slam? Good show, bad show? Did they deliver? Do you think the 1.2 million, do you think they retained enough of it for next week?
Oh yeah, they're on a roll. I mean, consistently I think the past month or month and a half following CM Punk, I think most of their numbers have been 1 million, or if not 1 million, close to it.
Yep.
They're starting to build their following. They're starting to do the right things, make the right moves. A local station for us, what is it? WFAN. They had Bryan Danielson on. They're starting to get exposure outside of just the wrestling community. There's a buzz about it. They're knocking it out of the park right now.
Right.
And they haven't made a misstep in a really, really long time. And it doesn't look like they're going to make a misstep. And look, they turned Jim Cornette, their biggest critic, essentially almost to the point where he praised a good majority of some of the stuff they've done. They got a lot of key guys going right now. Adam Cole, Bryan Danielson, Kenny Omega, Moxley. They're in a good spot.
They are.
Good show. They knocked it out of the park.
They did. They really did. I think Grand Slam was the perfect name for this, because they hit one. I was entertained throughout the whole 2 hours. Obviously the match that everyone was waiting for, they absolutely delivered and gave us the cliffhanger. So we're definitely going to get a sequel. When? I don't know. I think it needs to be Full Gear. Ralph, you're saying wait a year, but who knows? But I think this was a very good show, and just goes to show you wrestling's in a good place right now. Wrestling is an amazing place right now. And I think, you brought up WFAN, which for those that don't know, that's the #1 radio station in the #1 market in the country, that their signal is so strong, it goes through states. It's a huge, huge thing that Daniel Bryan's on there. And there were people from the station talking about it today, talking about their experience on the being there. I think the afternoon guy, Evan Roberts, was in the first row. So that's
yeah. There's one more thing I want to say before we wrap this up. If you're a wrestling fan, and obviously we've had times where we've been critical of AEW, we've been critical of WWE, NXT, we're critical of all of them. And if you're a wrestling fan, if you can't find a moment to enjoy, any moment from last night, no matter who you prefer, it's almost like you're not actually a fan, because even Bryan Danielson last night, he's going against Kenny Omega. They ring the bell. The fans are going nuts. He couldn't even contain himself.
Right.
Literally smiling. And he's supposed, Kenny Omega held it together, and they're going face to face. And this is almost like the start to what's going to probably be like a blood feud. And he couldn't even control himself. He was smiling because he knew how important this match was going to be last night. And he wanted to be there and be in that moment and be in the ring against Kenny Omega. And as fans, sometimes rather than be critical of so much, we just need to sit back and enjoy it. And last night was a very enjoyable show.
Yes, it definitely was. And I'm excited to see what we get in the future for AEW and what we get in the future for WWE. But let us know in the comments what you thought of AEW Dynamite. Don't forget to share us over social media on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, SCPB Podcast. Subscribe, hit that bell for notifications, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Squared Circle Psycho Babble.